Now we can start off and welcome everybody. Once again, welcome. This is a special event for Financial Month. Diego and I have been planning lots of events, and this is our first sort of stepping outside of the Lifebook and bringing in someone to talk to us about investing. This is my friend Brian Withers. He and I have been co-laborers in many respects at the Motley Fool, and he's now moved on. He's working on also, in addition to Motley Fool, he's working with the person we had last year as a speaker, Brian Feroldi. If you remember, he wrote the book, What Makes the Stock Market Go Up? And we talked to him last September. Now we're bringing in another Brian. So it's the Brian, and someone else. Matt show, yes. But here we are. Brian is an interesting character in many ways, is why I thought of him when I was trying to think of someone who would be a really, really good interviewee. But first, let me talk about, for those of you who are new to Lifebook or new to our platforms, let me talk about Diego and myself first. I am Sonny Kirtley. I am an investor. I am retired, or I guess you could say I am financially independent, or whatever you want to call that. I do not have to work for money anymore, and that's our goal for every one of you here, right? That's how we can achieve our life vision the best, is to actually achieve that financial independence. Been investing for longer than some of you have been alive. So let's just leave it at that. Learned a lot along the way. Started from absolutely nothing, a very, very modest and poor background. And if I can do this, so can you. And so Diego, why don't you introduce yourself real quickly, and then we'll introduce our guest.
Yes, sure. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to our session today. And my name is Diego, as well as the co-champion of the Financial Life, as well as the Wealth Angels co-founder with Sunny as well, which we build up this amazing, lovely community of people, like-minded people together to learn about personal finances and investing. Okay, so welcome all of you. We are having an exciting session today. I'm going to take a lot of notes. I'm going to be more on the support side of the technical things. So if you have any question, please put in the chat. So we are going to bring you on to ask question, or we're going to read the question as well. So we have Brian here to reply all of yours and share his wisdom.
Okay, so let me talk. I told you a little bit about Brian, where he's worked and what he's done in life. But I'm going to let Brian talk a little bit about himself and give you a little brief bio. Well, maybe not. Brian just stepped off the screen.
The door was closed and the dog wanted to be let in. So.
No, I've given up trying to control my dog. It's just hopeless. So there you go. So yeah, so Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Brian Withers. I currently live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I have a wife and two boys that are now 24 and 26. I'm 56 years old, and that'll, as we go through our story, that'll become a little bit of, my age is important for you for context, I think. I went to Virginia Tech as an undergrad in engineering, started work at IBM. My dad had worked at IBM as well, and I really liked computers when I was younger. When I was 15, my dad brought home an IBM. We got in the lottery, and I got one of the first IBM PCs, and that was sort of my first. In 1982, that was my first exposure, and it was crazy. I remember turning the thing on and hoping to have a really exciting moment. And I turned the computer on, and it makes this funny noise. And then it says non-system disk error. And I'm like, oh man, what's this computer stuff all about? So needless to say, I figured it out, and I didn't have a lot of money to buy software, and there wasn't software out there. So me and my friends, we learned to program, and that really got me interested in computers at a young age. And I went to Virginia Tech, partly because they required engineers, incoming freshmen, to have a computer. And so went to Virginia Tech, graduated, joined IBM in 1989, worked there for about 8.5 years, and joined Dell Computer in 1990, the beginning of 1998. And if you're familiar a little bit with the Dell story, at that point, that was Dell's heyday in the 90s. They were just growing like crazy, leaps and bounds, 50, 60, 70% every quarter. And it was just a really exciting time to be at a tech company that was growing like that, and got me interested in buying stocks. So I bought Dell stock. And then pretty soon after that, I was like, wait a minute, let's see, my salary is tied to Dell, my benefits are tied to Dell, my 401k is through Dell, and I'm buying Dell stock. Maybe I should diversify. And so 1998, I knew tech, and that's what I was getting into. And if you know the stock market history, 1998, 1999 were great times to invest in tech. 2000 and 2001 were not. So I had quite the onboarding experience with investing in tech stocks. And I bought like Cisco and Palm Pilot at the time. And I remember eBay, I think, was another one of my first stocks that I bought. And I specifically remember Cisco. I bought it. It doubled in price very, very quickly. And I just thought I was this stock investing thing. I was brilliant. I was smart. I was doing the right thing. And then over the next year or whatever, it went back down to my purchase price and then got cut in half again. So little bit of roller coaster ride early in my investing career. Really didn't figure things out until I joined the Motley Fool in 2004. And it was about the time I was 37. And my kids at the time were 6 and 8. And then I realized, holy cow, you don't just buy stocks, and sell them 6 months later. You buy stocks and invest them for the long term and hold on for the long term. And the longer I believe that it's not about timing the market, it's time in the market. And I was like, I'm 37 and I'm just now figuring this out. This is crazy. So I got my kids invested like just the same time I did into individual stocks. And that's an interesting story as well. So that's sort of how I got started investing. Spent some time with the Motley Fool, started posting in their community boards, met Sonny. They brought me on as a contractor. And then after 30 years in business in 2019, I decided I didn't want to be in corporate anymore, and started writing for the Fool full time, and have since done some stuff with them for Fool Live, and I've joined Long-Term Mindset. We're kind of a financial education company with the other two Brian Stoffel, Brian Feroldi, and we just brought on Matt Cochrane. So I think that brings you up to speed.
Very cool. Thank you very much, sir. Let me. Many people that may not be familiar with the Motley Fool, can you give a little background into this? We call ourselves Fools with a capital F, and that's a proud, that's sort of honorific title. We take that as a badge of honor. Can you explain what that means to our members?
Yeah, so the Motley Fool, the two Gardner brothers, David and Tom, who are the founders, have a love of Shakespeare, and it turns out in Shakespeare, the only one who can tell the king the truth and not get his head lopped off is the fool or the court jester. And so they positioned themselves when they started in the 90s. Investing at that time was only for high net worth clients. You had to have a broker. It was sort of this exclusive club that you had to be a part of. And they were very much not that at all. And so they talked about individuals, investors can beat the market. And at the time, that was very against the financial media. And so the whole idea of the Motley Fool was they could speak the truth about investing. And the way that they price their services, it's really just a subscription for information that you get, versus where these investment companies want a piece of your money. And that's where they set themselves apart.
Yeah. I think the idea that the individual investor is still anathema to most of the professional investors in the world, but I think the Motley Fool's made a big dent in that perception, as you and your efforts are continuing to do so, and Diego and I are striving to do so. The individual investor actually has huge advantages over the professionals. They just don't want you to know that. All right, very cool. So you mentioned your kids earlier, and you started them investing at the same time that you started investing. Tell us about this.
So let me tell you the story. It was like one of these, I should have had a V8 moments, like, and realized that I wanted to get my kids started as soon as possible. And I'm like, they're 6 or 8, they can't even read, at least the younger one couldn't read at the time. And I'm like, well, how do I do this? How do I get them excited about something like they have no idea? So I got out a piece of construction paper, 11 by 17, made it into 6 squares, and tried to get physical objects to represent companies. So like I had a little Buzz Lightyear figurine. At the time, Pixar was a publicly traded company, and I put that in one of the boxes. I drew the golden arches for McDonald's. I drew the Dell logo. I think I had a game cartridge for EA Sports. So I put some different things on the piece of paper to sort of represent the different companies that they would be familiar with, and they would know. And then I gave them a set of pennies, and each penny was like worth $100 of an investment. And I said, okay, take your pennies and put them in the squares for the companies that you think are going to be the most successful, that you like the most. And they split their pennies up, and that's how I invested for the first year. And then they didn't really know what happened. I just sort of left it there. And we came back a year later and did the same exercise. And then over time, every year as we did this during the summer, I got them more involved in the process of picking the companies and looking at how things have done in the past. And then we introduced portfolio management as they got more stock picks under their belt. But I remember one summer, it was crazy. Netflix stock was going through the roof, and I was like, man, maybe I should trim and pull back. And I actually sold some. And my kids were like, they didn't really know the price. They didn't look at valuation. They just knew that they loved Netflix and loved the movies coming in the mail. And so they invested more when I was selling. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Let's see how this works out. And their investment has done very, very well.
So those of you who are not familiar with some investing terms, the word 10-bagger means a company that has increased in value 10 times since you initially invested. So Brian, how many 10-baggers did your kids pick during this exercise?
Oh my gosh, they've had a ton of them. They bought Amazon early on. They bought Netflix. They bought there's a number of other different companies that they bought. But part of what was cool about the whole process was when I was investing with my kids, I knew they had tons of time in front of them. And so we were in no hurry to sell stuff if it went up. And they really didn't care. I mean, they couldn't touch the money. They had their kids' lives going on. So they weren't like, hey, Dad, we need to sell Netflix. It went up 10%. They didn't really even pay attention to that. So it was kind of neat to watch. I learned through the kids a little more patience, and their portfolio grew a lot because basically they picked great companies and they let the stocks appreciate over a long period of time. I want to say my older son sold Netflix recently within the past year or two, and at the time I think he'd held it for like 15 years. So it was pretty incredible gain over that period of time. And I think both of them had 100-bagger with Netflix, one or two of the positions that they held.
100-bagger means the investment went up by a factor of 100 over the time. So yeah, that's an amazing investing story. And I think this is what I want to point out to everybody here in Lifebook and Wealth Angels, is that the secret to investing is it's not hard. You pick companies you know that you think are going to prosper over the long term, and you hold on to the stock. It's like fundamentally, that's where you start, right? And there's always more you can learn, and there's always better things you can kind of tweak around the edges and get better and better at this, or at least more comfortable with it. But that's it. Right? That's the story of investing. His kids are such an amazing example of that, right? They just pick companies that they, even at a single digit age, they could identify companies that they thought were going to be great companies, and boy, were they right.
Yeah. And I, part of, I want to point out that we didn't necessarily just throw darts at a dartboard to pick companies. As we got into it, I used the Motley Fool stock advisor service to help them with sort of a vetted list of companies that the Motley Fool was recommending. So I knew that at least these had a better than average shot of being successful. And that was sort of where we fished, and it's done very well for them.
Let me jump in as well, Sunny.
Yep.
I love this story, and this is really, really priceless, Brian. Thank you for being so kind, sharing it with us as well. I have 3 kids as well, so I'm focusing on educating my kids. But before that, right, I have read most of your tweets before our call, and clearly putting these 2 topics was really, really priceless. But before your kids, right, could you tell us, money-wise, what were your growing up years like? Tell us about a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, so growing up was interesting because I was very fortunate, and like my dad worked at IBM. My mom was able to stay home with us as I had 2 other sisters growing up, and I was the oldest. And so I got a computer when I was 14, and that was sort of a little bit unheard of. So it was kind of I had a very good growing up, but I remember there would always be things as a kid, there's always things that you want. And I remember my mother saying to me countless times, we don't have the money for that. We don't have the money for that. And that was drilled in my head. And it was interesting that as I grew up and got to where I was, making my money in my own career, early on, I was a bit of a spender, not so much of a saver, because I didn't want if I wanted something, I wanted to get it. And, I didn't want to have to say to my kids, no, we can't afford that. And so that was a sort of an odd growing up. I've come around, I've matured a little bit more, and I don't buy everything that I need, and certainly value experiences much, much more than I do material things now. But that was an interesting, and the other thing, Diego, I think is important to understand is I was able to go to school, and my parents paid for that. And so I was able to graduate with it was kind of funny. I'd gotten a credit card my senior year in college, and I had racked up about $450 worth of credit card bills, and the credit limit was $500. And at the end of my senior year, I had sort of maxed out the credit card. I didn't have any cash in the checking account, and I remember, like, how am I going to pay this Visa bill? And so I remember I went to the bank, and I took a $50 cash advance on my Visa, and I immediately deposited to my checking account, and I paid the minimum, I think, which was $25. I paid the minimum on my Visa card, and I had like $25 to last me a week until graduation, when I knew I was going to get some graduation gifts. And as soon as I got my graduation gift, I paid off my credit card. And so I basically started after college with a sort of a zero. which was much more ahead of where many people today graduate college. They're at a negative, and that makes it really hard.
Borrowed against your Visa card to pay your Visa minimum. Now that's
yeah. I was like, this is brilliant.
Yeah. So
I can't believe they're going to let me do this.
It's amazing. When my daughters were in college, no work experience, no jobs, never. There were deluge with offers for credit cards.
Oh yes, yeah, it's different. It's much different now.
So Brian, what happened with the university fee for your kids? Has been paid off from the investments, or you have been helping them?
Yeah, so what I did for paying for the kids' college, I want to say when they were in like middle school or junior high, finally realized I'm like, hey, I'm gonna have to figure out how to pay for this college thing. So I started a couple of oh geez, what's the account now? The
GMA.
No, they had their own, the money that they were investing, and somebody had asked me how much we'd put in to start. We had put in $2,500 to start, and mainly that was because that was the minimum to open a UGMA account in Fidelity at the time, back in 2004. Now you can open accounts with $100, and I would encourage you to just start with something. And then we put in like 1,000 or 1,500 every year with them. But that was, to me, that was always their money, and the UGMA account, it had their name on it. And when they became adults, we transferred it over to them. But the college funding, why is this name escaping me? It's not the
529.
Yeah, thank you. 529 account. So I started a 529 account for each kid. And the reason I did the 529 was we were sort of late to the college funding process, and that allowed me to put more money in each year. And I just basically, out of every paycheck, I think I took $100 or $200 and put it into each of the kids' accounts. And it turned out, and it's always hard to figure out how much you put into these kinds of accounts now. Today, they're a lot more flexible, and you can use them for other things besides education, or you can use them for private school or whatever. So they're a lot more flexible today than they were. And we got fortunate. My oldest son went to Rowan University in New Jersey, which was a state school. And I think it was like $80,000 for the whole 4 years. And we had saved about half of that through the 529. And then about the time he became a junior in college, my other one was graduating, but he didn't want to go to college and wasn't sure what he was going to do. So we were able to rob his 529 to pay for the older kids' college. And I think it worked out perfectly. I drained the 529 account on the last tuition payment for Alex, but then we didn't have any money for Zach, but that's okay. It took a while to kind of figure out what he wanted to do.
Awesome. Hey, that's good. That's cool. Good
Yeah.
story. Yeah, 529, for those who aren't familiar, 529 is a state-based, it goes state by state. Savings account is tax advantaged for saving for educational expenses. And so every state is a different one. And I was motivated to do our particular state's 529 because if you put in $5,000, you got $1,000 tax credit on your state taxes. So guess exactly how much I put in every year to the penny.
There you go.
Exactly. Right. So yeah, so there each state is different, and every plan has different features and whatnot. So it's a little bit of a hodgepodge, and you don't have to use your own state's plan. You can use any state plan. So if you're in the United States, savings for college is a great vehicle to do so. Look around, some are better than others. Okay. Yeah.
Brian,
Yes.
another question to you is, how do you get interested about investing? I think it was at 37 years old. It was posted on LinkedIn. And how did you learn it?
Yeah, so before I stumbled upon the Motley Fool, I had heard, well, you have to invest in mutual funds, and that's the way to do it. And Peter Lynch at the time had his Fidelity Magellan Fund, which was closed. And so I had an account through Fidelity, and I bought some mutual funds through there. That's really how I got started. Other than when I was at IBM, I joined the stock purchase program there. And when I was at Dell, I joined the stock purchase plan there. But part of it was just the excitement of Dell and the fact that a stock could bring this kind of wealth to so many people. I knew many people who had been at Dell for years and talked about that they would joke about how somebody sold some stock to buy his wife a couch. And now that couch is worth like $100,000 if they had kept the stock. So it was interesting to sort of these stories got me excited about figuring out wealth and whatnot. And then doing it a few years on my own, I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I encourage you, whether it's the Motley Fool or other investing clubs or here, this is something that's hard to sort of learn on your own. There's many resources now that whether it's YouTube or whatever that are helpful, but you want to find some trusted resources that you can guide you along the way. And it really was just a curiosity and an excitement about how companies worked, and the fact that as a individual shareholder, you can benefit alongside the success of the company. And that was exciting to me.
That's right. So I also stumbled across investing at about the same age you did, Brian, at age 37. When I woke up, looked around and realized, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Yeah, very much. It was whoa.
I've got to retire one day. Oh my, what the heck? And so I also started reading. I went down, I was working in New York City at the time, the financial hub of America, right? And so I went down to the New York Public Library, started checking out books about investing, and they're all about mutual funds, every one of them. And so I learned a little bit about mutual funds, and I think a few other topics, but it didn't really excite me until I discovered an investing club. Actually, the organization that supports investing clubs called, back then it was the National Association of Investing Clubs. And me and a bunch of friends at work were kind of interested in all learning together. So we started this and learned through trial and error. We all put in $10 a month, the grand sum of $10 a month into a pooled account. And we would invest that money by researching the stocks and then, making decisions, and learned a lot, right? But I've come to the conclusion that some sort of community, some sort of shared experience is essential, not necessarily for the mechanics of investing, although that really helps. It's for the emotional side of investing, where you got to, Peter Lynch says that if you don't have the intestinal fortitude for investing, no matter how smart you are, you're going to fail. That's a misquote, but that's the general idea. And so I learned a lot during Investment Club, but just having other people to talk through when, the stock that we just bought fell 30% or something like that, and that emotional gut, because money is very emotional. And it's our money, and we don't want to see it go down. We want to see it go up. And even when it goes up, it can be also emotional, a little too euphoric sometimes. It might get a little off kilter. So that's the real thing. And we strive here in Lifebook, and especially in Wealth Angels, to form that kind of community where we can offer that kind of support. So, and I think it's vital. I think it's vital. What's the African proverb that I like to quote? It's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I think it's a really, really nice way of putting it. Cool.
There is a question from the members. She says, I just don't find the time to research on each potential investment. This is why a managed fund is an easier option. What is your advice to research efficiently and effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christina. You know, if time is an issue for you, absolutely. I think I would encourage you, careful when you say managed funds, because a lot of times the fees for management funds are 1% or even a fixed dollar amount plus 1%. And that 1% doesn't feel like a lot, but it can really hamper your investing returns. And you know, I would encourage you to look at index funds from Vanguard, have very, very, very low fees, like 0.25 or 0.025%. You know, very, very small fees, and you're going to get market average returns that way. And for my 401k investing, if you have a 401k and have the opportunity to get the company match, that's something that you really need to take advantage of. And those funds, a lot of times, all you have to pick from are index funds and managed funds. So, you know, that's something as I was working, I always made sure my 401k was invested in a total market fund or an S&P 500 fund. And then if there are managed funds that you're interested in, and I know the ARC funds are very popular. What I find is I look at a fund and somebody recommends a fund, and I look through the stocks. You can go and find what the fund's all about and how they invest, and you can look at their top holdings. And usually I look at the holdings and I go, I like that one, I like that one, no, 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 no. And so, you know, I find only about half of the stocks that I would want to be actually invested in. And that's potentially a good way to get an idea of companies that you're interested in. And I guess the best way is read the annual report. Usually there's a letter from the CEO. You know, one of the companies that I recently invested in, I found through just a retail experience that I had. I was at a restaurant, and the bill came and it said, hey, to pay, scan this barcode, and you know, you can pay with your phone. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Scanned it, and like within less than 30 seconds, but before the waitress got back to the kitchen with our dishes, I had paid the bill and we were done. And I realized that I looked at it and it said powered by Toast. And it got me interested. Well, what's Toast? Well, what do they do? And I looked them up. I went to their investor relations page. They had some presentations about what they did. Turned out they weren't public at the time. I followed them. They went public. They came out. The stock went through the roof. And I kind of held on to when things settled down a little bit with the company. And they kept improving their business. They kept expanding. Looked like they were doing smart things, capturing more customers. And so I invested. So that's another way that you can find stocks to invest in. And I encourage you, especially if you're getting started, to invest in things that you know. It just gives you a sort of a leg to stand on and help you sort of get over that hump of doing the research.
Good advice. Great advice. Christine says she lives in Europe, and so they don't have employee matches like some companies do. So yeah, that's unfortunate. But nonetheless, it's your money. Whatever money you have, you can take his advice to heart. Generally, Warren Buffett says this. Motley Fool says this. We will say this. A simple index fund is a great place to put your money if you want exposure to the stock market without any effort. And then you can, as you get more confident and learn more, you can start taking money out of the index fund and then investing in the companies that you feel comfortable investing in on an individual stock basis. That has always been our advice, and I think it's great advice. The sad truth is, when you're talking about managed funds, again, you can find good managed funds. I'm never going to say that they don't exist. But you have to do almost as much research to find a good managed fund as you do to find a good stock to invest in. So I would simply say focus on where the payoff is higher, and that would be the good stock, the individual stocks.
I have another question to you, to both of you maybe, because we learn from failures. And then what was your biggest failure in investing? And also your best one? Both of you. And Sunny, I
Oh,
believe you got many, so bring it on. That's right.
yeah. So generally, my biggest mistakes are involve the word sell. So generally I've sold too soon. And Netflix, I talked to you a little bit about Netflix, and my kids were buying and I was selling. And I ended up in 2010, my Netflix, there was just a tremendous year for Netflix after 2008 and 2009. And they were really spreading out across the country. And, you know, the stock became, the position became my largest position, and it had more money in that specific stock than I've ever had before. And I was just very uncomfortable with it. And I'd sell a little bit to bring the dollar value down, and then it kept going back up. I sell a little bit more to bring the dollar value back down. It was sort of this sleep at night thing, and it just it was crazy. I was so stressed out about this position that was such a big part of my portfolio. Is I ended up just selling it all. It was crazy. And what I should have done is I should have been looking not necessarily at the stock price, but where the business was. And in 2010, Netflix was really just getting started. They were really just started launching their streaming service. They just started getting involved internationally. It was clear that Walmart and Blockbuster and Amazon weren't going to, leave Netflix in the dust. And it was very an emotional decision that got me out of the stock. I guess on the other side, on the same side, is Mercado Libre, which is now my #1 position. It's essentially, if you think of Amazon, it's the Amazon of Latin America, South America, Mexico. And I've owned them for about a decade now, and I've added to them over time. And I'm just tremendously confident in the management team, in the business strategy, in what they're doing. They continue to grow. E-commerce continues to be a mega trend, and most of their revenue comes from only 3 of 18 countries in the region. And so I'm just very, very excited about the stock, and have purchased, I think, 13 different times over the years, and have only sold a teeny little bit off of it. And so that's sort of where that's sort of my success story, is if you can get into a company that you're comfortable with and you buy a little bit more over years, that can pay off. Sonny, what about you?
Well, I certainly want to emphasize the long-term perspective is always the way to win with individual stocks. When Netflix went through its debacle, when they were mail order, there was CDs by mail, or DVDs by mail was their business model. It was thriving, was doing great. Then they decided to split off and start the streaming service, and they renamed their DVD by mail business some strange name. I don't know what it was. Wixter, that's it. Yes. And I thought the business had fundamentally changed. I'm no longer interested in the company, so I sold everything, all my Netflix, everything gone. Huge mistake. I don't know how much money that cost me. It was way more than I want to calculate. Now, back in the day, again, Brian and I both were Motley Fool members, and they used to have a pretty good portfolio tracking tool that they discontinued and replaced with a different one today. But that tool, I kept 2 portfolios: my actual current portfolio and a portfolio of all the issues I sold, as if I bought it at the price I sold it. So I'm tracking that from the time I sold it, just to give myself a little bit of comparison. Am I doing the right thing? Are my sales making sense compared to my current portfolio, and all this? That's sort of accountability exercise. Well, Netflix went on the sold portfolio, went on to soar hugely, and several other big losers. I had a turnaround opportunity to invest in Denny's back in the day. Denny was almost bankrupt. They were having a restaurant change. And so I got it on a very, very cheap price. I think it was through the special ops service, if you remember that, Brian.
Yep.
And it just went nowhere, and I got impatient again. Impatience is the killer in investing, right? And I sold it, and later it went up like a factor of 30. So
Oh, wow.
it's just one of those, it's those things that those painful lessons are important to keep track of. That's why I kept this portfolio of my sold issues, so I can look back and say, oh, that was stupid. Oh, that one hurts, you know? So you're reminded of the things that you did wrong. But at the time when they discontinued the portfolio, I'm happy to report that my actual portfolio vastly outperformed the solds, including Netflix and Denny's and the other big winners that I let go of, because I had enough big winners in my own portfolio. Now, just for reasons I don't want to influence people, or I'm not going to talk about my own personal winners, but I will tell you about one story. I want to share this with everyone. You were mentioning the price, the size of the position, making you nervous. And there's a lot of people who focus a lot on the price of the stock. And one of them is actually one of the founders of the Motley Fool. At one time, one of the brothers, which I will remain nameless here, was really, really big on valuation as a part of his stock picking thing. And this was probably around 2012, 14, some early on, Brian, when you and I were working there. And I asked him, you've got some great companies in this portfolio. Why don't you have Amazon? I mean, Amazon is obviously a fantastic company. Amazon at that time was trading around $280 a share. And he said, well, I've calculated my intrinsic value, and I'll only buy it when it gets down to $265. Okay, I think you're making a mistake. It's a monster company, right? And we had this conversation several times. And before the next time I spoke with him, Amazon stock had gotten down to $265 and like 12 cents. He didn't buy. And so he says that's where you start fixating on what I call false precision and fixating on price and all this kind of stuff instead of looking at the quality of the business. And I think what you've done, Brian, is a good example of looking at the quality of the businesses. When you talked about Netflix was just getting started in 2010 and all the opportunities it was opening up for itself. That's looking at the quality of the business. And sometimes we have to focus only on that more than on what the stock is trading at this moment. Now, I'm not going to go crazy and say you don't buy a stock at any price, but you don't let 12 cents stand between you and a fortune. So that's the story there. All right.
Yes, thank you. And there is another question. So let me bring some questions here as well. Having the consideration of Brian's age, right? You are in your 50s, right? 55, all right?
56.
Okay, thank you. What will be your suggestion for the portfolio diversification? I guess it's also the portfolio management point of view. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, so generally, so I have a pretty small portfolio of stocks. I own 20 different stocks right now, and really that's where our net worth is wrapped up in those stocks. And I own the house. That we have a mortgage, but I own the house, and that's really our assets. And during 2019, 2020, 2021, tech stocks and software stocks were just taking off. And my portfolio was like, a bunch of helium balloons attached to it, was going nuts. And as much as I enjoyed the run up, the 2022 was really challenging, and my portfolio went down 60% in 2022. And I was 55 at the time, and I said, well, if I was 65, that would have been disastrous for my retirement portfolio to get it cut in more than half. So over the last year, 18 months, I've been diversifying into more sort of steady holdings. And I own two, what I call REITs, real estate investment trusts, and Home Depot, which is a dividend payer. And sort of kind of my thought is over the next 10 years, I'm going to move to more conservative investments in my portfolio. I guess the other thing to think about too is I think about my portfolio in two different really buckets. I have the retirement funds in my IRA and my Roth, and I also have my brokerage money. And sort of the brokerage money, the way I think about the brokerage money is it bridges me to when I can use the retirement accounts. I heard this term recently. It's called Coast FI. I think the Pioneers tagged that term. If you look up Pioneers Coast FI in Google, there's a really interesting article. But basically, Coast FI is, hey, I put enough money in my portfolio and I just need to just be patient and let compounding do its thing. And as long as I'm not withdrawing money from that, and basically we make enough to pay for our expenses in a given year. And so I'm really just in a nice place where I can sort of let my portfolio do its thing. And then, over the next decade, I'm going to move into some more dividend paying stocks and more comfortable before I have to tap that money. Did that answer your question, Diego?
Absolutely, okay. Absolutely. So you are literally all into your stock or business investing aside your mortgage, right?
Yeah, and part of that is, when I was working in corporate, I had sort of the what I would call the training wheels of index funds in my 401k. So part of my investing stuff was on a set it and forget it, no brainer, don't have to think about it. And then I've been literally investing for 30 years now, 30 plus years. And so I'm at a place where I'm very comfortable with that. And I would encourage you to, take your time and if you're happy with index funds and that's doing great for you, and you don't have the time, that's absolutely a wonderful way to invest. Put a little bit from your paycheck every time into these retirement vehicles, and I think they pay off.
Well, I actually lived that nightmare scenario you're trying to avoid, because I retired in 2021. And by the end of 2022, my retirement profile looked pretty weak.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I've lived that pain. But the good news is that I found out that what the financial advice industry says is the amount you need to live in retirement is not exactly accurate. There's ways that you can actually do it with less money than they recommend, and I'm a living example of that, thriving just fine. So there's a lot in the financial advice industry that's that can be questioned, and certainly that's one of them. But I think the big key factor is knowing what your financial independence number actually is, and we talk about that a lot in our course. And so that's the answer to the question of how much is enough. That's a good way of quantizing that particular question. So yeah, very cool. So Brian, there's a question for us from Clara. Says, I have a question. When Brian lost 60% of his portfolio, what did he have to do? It's supposedly one has to be especially patient.
Yeah. So Clara, there was an interesting story in 2009 where I was investing sort of every available dollar and penny and dime that I had into the market, because I was so excited about the stocks that I was investing in. And certainly during 2008, the prices were coming down, and all the companies that I was looking at looked like they were on sale. They were considerably lower priced than they were in the previous month, in the previous 6 months. And unfortunately, Dell decided that they didn't need my employment anymore in March of 2009. And that was actually the bottom of the stock market. And I was laid off, and I didn't have an emergency fund. And so, I have 2 young kids. My wife is at home with the kids. And I was like, oh crap, I'm going to have to raise some money. And so I sold a bunch of names you'll recognize: Starbucks, Nvidia, Netflix. And I sold these stocks at a loss at the time. And you never want to be a desperate seller. I sold these stocks at a loss to raise cash to pay our mortgage. And, it didn't take me very long to get a job, 6-8 weeks, but it could have been much, much longer. And so I remembered that and learned that and looked back at these stocks that I sold, and had I had an emergency fund and had been able to leave them invested in the market, they would have been incredibly beneficial for me. So in 2022, when the market was just going down, I was kind of like a little bit of a deer in the headlights. Is, well, the market's going to do what the market's going to do. I'm going to stay invested for the long term. I did have cash outside the market, so I didn't have to tap those investments. And so they've come around a little bit, but what was nice is I wasn't dependent on that money. I didn't need that money right now. I was in a job that was paying the bills, and it was more of a when can I fully retire statement versus am I worried about buying groceries or putting gas in the car next week.
Yeah, that's a very, very poignant story. We hammer that a lot in our financial freedom fundamentals course, is that people don't think an emergency fund is important until suddenly it's important.
Yeah.
Right. And so yeah, that's a very crucial piece of information. Also, I think it's very important to realize that you never invest money that you might need in the next 5 to 10 years. That's not what you invest, right? You invest the money that you're not going to need so you can have it time to grow. And so, good story, Brian. Thank you. The next thing I would love to ask you, we're getting close to time here. I think you've already gone through a lot of this, but there are some people here who are teetering on the edge of deciding to become investors, and they're very brand new to this. Any advice you would give them?
Yeah, I guess I saw there was one person who had their own business and didn't have a lot of time. Start by investing in, or at least just being curious, right? And kind of poking around a little bit, learning about investing. And one of the sort of the best ways to do that, and this is going to sound weird, is do like I did with the kids, is just pick 5 stocks, pick 5 companies that you're very comfortable in, and maybe go to their, you can Google company name, whatever the company name is, investor relations, and you can go to their investor relations page, and usually there's a nice presentation that talks about the business strategy. And, within 10 to 15 minutes, you can see a little bit about what the company's all about, how they make money, what it is they're trying to do to grow. And I would just get started with a small amount and I would pick 5. The reason that I say 5 is you're going to be wrong. Some of these are going to be wrong. And if you only pick 1 or 2 and both of those are a dud, you're going to be scared off. And so hopefully if you pick 5 and it's a small enough amount of money that you can that gets you curious and interested in those companies. And it makes a huge, huge difference if you're an owner of even just 1 share or $100 worth of Amazon. You can buy partial shares today, so you can get into 5 stocks for $10 a piece or whatever is worth it for you, and that'll sort of force you to be interested, I guess. And then if it's not something that you like doing, I would go back to the ETF piece and then just continue. A lot of the fire sites, that's what they preach. I enjoy the stock investing bit. It's mainly because I appreciate good business models, and when folks have customer service and can offer values to their customers, I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, to discover how much intellectually stimulating learning about businesses actually is. I would never have guessed that.
Hmm.
All right, I come from a hard science background, right? Or the tech IT background. So the idea of learning about businesses never seemed exciting to me at all. But once I started just reading about them, it's actually very, very interesting, and it really kind of pulls you into this
Mm-hmm.
a lot more. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to follow Brian's advice. And even today, like I say, with the democratization of investing, it's so easy. There's the activation threshold to get over to start investing is very, very low. You don't need a lot of money. It's easy to set up accounts. The fees are gone. There used to be huge fees involved in investing. If you're investing in individual stocks, mostly it costs you $0 for every transaction nowadays. So it's amazing how easier and easier and easier it's become to become a new investor. So yeah.
Hey, Sonny, there's a couple of questions on accounts, and I think it'd be great to sort of wrap up with that before we finish.
Okay.
If the easiest place to start investing in individual stocks is what's called a brokerage account, whether it's Fidelity or Schwab or TD Ameritrade, whatever your mainline bank is, it's likely they have a brokerage account. And that's basically, a checking account on steroids. Is you can invest in the market. But that's in what's called a taxable account. So if you sell stuff, you have to pay taxes on it. There's two other retirement accounts, an IRA, which is a traditional individual retirement account, and then a Roth IRA, which also has some special tax benefits in it. I have money in all three of them. And split out, I want to say it's 30% in the brokerage, 40% in the IRA, and 30% in the Roth account. And that allows me to have tax flexibility in when I sell, and the tax treatment of when I can pull things out. So Roth IRA is awesome. If you don't have one, I would encourage you to sort of do some research on it. And a traditional IRA is sort of where my 401k rolled over. Think of it as a 401k kind of account rolled over into an IRA when I left my company.
Yeah. So there's basically two fundamental types of accounts. There's just normal taxable accounts, like Brian said, where you just open up, you can do whatever investing you want to, but it may trigger a tax burden when you make a transaction. Okay. In the United States. I'm sure that's true around the world as well. Maybe not in Singapore where Diego lives, but anyway, most places there's a tax burden. But then there are tax advantaged accounts, and these terms, the IRA, the 401k, the 403b, these are references to American tax code, right? So they're sort of specific to the United States, but they're and most countries do have some sort of retirement vehicles that give you tax advantages, right? Whatever the term is in your country. But in the United States, a 401k or a 403b are generally associated with your employment, right? So you can add money to this tax advantage account while you're employed. Sometimes the company will add to that as well, and then you have that available when you retire. Then the IRA, the individual retirement account, has two flavors: the traditional and the Roth. And so the Roth has different tax implications. Both of them grow tax-free. For the IRA, the money you put in, assuming that you have to meet the income thresholds, is not taxed. It goes in without paying tax on the money you put in, and it grows tax-free. For the Roth, you have to pay tax on the money that you've earned, and then it goes into the Roth IRA, but you can take it out tax-free. So it's just that there's different vehicles for different purposes. And this is where it gets a little complicated, but the basic point is, if you have access to a tax sheltered account, use it. Okay, because you don't have to pay taxes as you're investing along the life journey. But even if you don't, you have access to a brokerage account where you can start investing, and investing in individual stocks that you hold for a long time is also very tax efficient. You don't trigger anything until you sell. So it's a good idea to do that. Okay, great. Good points, Brian.
Yes, so we are in the 1 hour mark, and I would like to say thank you so much, Brian, for coming and jumping on the call with us. So I will ask you if you have some friend you can introduce us to do the interview, because I think there is a lot of wisdom, there is a lot of insights from here as well. So if we can do this more regularly for the community, will be amazing. So
Yeah, I'll have to. Matt Cochrane might be a good one to talk to. Yeah, if you could reach out to Matt.
Yeah, we'll try that.
that would be amazing. Yes. Let's take a group picture with everybody here. If you are okay to put your camera on, with Brian, that would be amazing. And it's starting from this financial man as well. So some peace or something. Peace, yes, in the Japanese style. Okay, great. I have one page here. Let me go through the other one. And I think Triana got a question. So do you want to ask your question while I'm trying to save this
Sure.
picture?
So my question was actually for both Sunny and Brian about Netflix. I'm just interested that you both sold when it was sort of early on, and then like Sunny, you even tracked it. And I'm just wondering, like when it kept doing well, why didn't you just put a small amount back in? Like once you let it go, why didn't you just buy again? Because you could see it going up. Is one like just interesting on the mindset. I feel like for me, if I was in Brian's position, I started to be nervous about sleeping at night. Like that's obviously super important, right? But I think the other side of that is you still put the same amount of money in. What's the difference if it does well?
Right.
So pull out your original investment and let it ride, right? Like I always look like, okay, like if I take what I put in, I'm out nothing. It's all upside, right? Is that the wrong strategy?
That's one way to think about it. You know, it's all your money. And if that
See,
Jason Hall likes to sell a small portion of a position while it's up, and he says, if I sell a small portion of it, I feel like I've scratched that itch that I've captured some of the gains in you know my stuff, and I can sort of leave it alone. And I think now, Trina, I would definitely have done that. I would have maybe sold half of it and then just sort of said, okay, I'm at peace with it. Part of it is I'm just more mature as an investor now, and I understand it's all about you know the business and how the business is doing. And when I was in that moment and in that state, it was a very emotional decision and not necessarily a fact-based, business-driven decision. And that's part of the challenge of being a long-term investor.
So I'll add to that. Mine was a business-driven decision. I thought Netflix had lost its mind.
Oh, because they did.
Yeah, I thought they'd gone crazy. And so I said, I'm out of here, right? Now, why didn't I get back in? Just the way I manage my portfolio. I have a very small number of, like Brian has 20, I usually have around 10 or at most 12 positions in my portfolio. And I typically go for smaller, higher potential businesses. Okay. And so by the time I realized I was wrong about Netflix's business, it had not lost its mind at all. It was doing fantastic. It was already too large of a company to attract my attention again.
Oh, interesting.
Fishing elsewhere. Okay. But yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with going back in, changing your mind. It's not like I was stubborn or anything. I was just being stupid. There's a difference between stubborn and stupid. But also, like Brian, that was a while back. We all grow. I grow as an investor every single year. I can tell you I'm a better investor today than I was last year or the year before or the year before that. Now, not maybe a huge amount, but you learn. You learn from both academically, you learn experientially, right? You learn from other people what they're doing. And that was what I was back at that time. And I made that decision. Like, the good thing about investing is there's not just one right answer, right? There's so many businesses out there you can invest in and profitably invest in. And you don't have to get every one of the best winners at that time to be a very, very successful individual investor. So I don't worry about it. I don't lose sleep at night over the ones I missed. I kind of find it amusing to go back and say, boy, that was a stupid thing to do. But nonetheless, is my portfolio okay? Yes, it's just fine. Thank you. So yeah.
Okay. So Brian, when you were selling off in like now that you're wanting longer term or like less volatile stuff because of your age, does it hurt to be selling stuff that's down? Like when your portfolio dropped, are you only selling the winners to diversify and waiting for the other ones to come back?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's not necessarily, I don't start with what has the stock done, should I sell? I start with how is the business doing relative to how was the business doing last year, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And some of the sales are, I go ahead and sold some losses in my brokerage account to sort of offset some of my gains as well. So you can sort of sandwich sort of a big gain with a loss to reduce the tax dollar. That's a little bit of the tax code wagging the dog versus the other way around. So it's more of, I look at the business and what the potential is and sort of how big it is in my portfolio. I kind of think of them in thirds, like my rock solid rock stars are at the top. My middle tier is they're either going to move up or they're going to move down. And then my bottom tier are, hey, I'm sort of newer positions or older positions that have like Lemonade and Zoom have dropped considerably, but I'm still really excited about the companies, but I don't necessarily want to add to them until they sort of proven themselves again. So thinking about your portfolio in sort of buckets of tiers has helped me figure out whether I want to move something up to a bigger tier or reduce the exposure and move it to a lower tier.
Thank you.
Yep. Great question.
Right. Well, Brian, if no one else is bold enough to ask you a question, I suppose we'll move on. This has been a great interview. Thank you, my friend, for coming. It's been good to see you on Zoom again after a long time. Hey, I think you should reconsider about not coming to the New York City thing.
There we go.
All right, everyone, thank you for showing up and playing full out. We're here for you in the financial month to answer all of your questions that this may have triggered. And also, if you want a smaller, more dedicated community about personal finance and or learning to invest, we have that as well in Wealth Angels. We'd love to see you over there. So, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Brian.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.